So I could bore you to tears with slides, but I figured it was 20 minutes. Why not just have a conversation? And so thank you for being here. I've been a security practitioner for my entire career for roughly about 20 years. And one of the things that's really fascinating about the time that we're in right now is what I would call a security transformation. And so what we're seeing is an evolution of security that we haven't really seen in a long time, and it's one of the major things that's rippling through cloud providers, security vendors, and security practitioners throughout the entire industry, and I thought I would talk about that a little bit today. And when we look at that, we need to take a little bit of a step back, and we see that the evolutions of security are really highly attached to the evolutions in IT. And so when we had the mainframe era that rolled into client-server era, and then we are really having a client-server migrate into what we would call client-cloud. And roughly 6 to 8 years later of mass adoption of those technologies, we effectively have an evolution within the security industry on how we protect the content and transactions that we're sworn to really provide security to. And so what we're seeing right now is the cloud evolution really started roughly 10 years ago. We're having a massive adoption of cloud services, whether we want to call them SaaS, PaaS, or IaaS. But really that massive adoption coupled with a significant threat evolution landscape that we're seeing on top of that is really forcing a lot of practitioners to really take a hard look on how they secure their content and transactions within these ecosystems. And so what we're seeing right now is an evolution in that space, and the realistic environment that practitioners are having to deal with is that when we look at content and transactions, data and transactions on their enterprise, it's effectively leaving and going to third parties. And so what we're seeing is the security controls that have been put in place to really protect those network controls, vulnerability management, identity and authentication subsystems, et cetera, are rendered inert. Because users, one, are enabled with mobile devices, they're leaving the environment, they're going and working outside of the offices, and the content and transactions are going to third parties, which is effectively rendering the entire network ecosystem of security controls inert and unusable. And so what we're really having to is not a change in the security controls in which we have, but really the placement of those controls. And so the way that we've been protecting the content and transactions within our enterprise doesn't really change, but the vendors and the methods in which we protect them change quite dramatically. And so as we see that, and I'll talk about the rippling effect that it's having on cloud providers, first and foremost, and then security practitioners and security vendors subsequently. So first, when we take a look at the cloud providers that are really starting to see security being forced upon them over the past 10 years, we're really starting to have a change in the perception of what it is that we call security. So there's a lot of conversations that we've been having in industry for the past 5, 6 years, that cloud is something to be feared, that there's a lot of insecure cloud providers, and quite honestly, the fact of the matter is, the answer is yes. They've been quite bad historically, first and foremost, because there have been very much a large amount of consumer-oriented cloud providers out there versus enterprise software cloud providers. And as a result of that, the demands upon them have been very different, consumers versus enterprise providers. And when you take a look at the enterprise providers, we see a lot of regulatory compliance issues placed upon them, but not necessarily driving security to what a practitioner is trying to do, which is to solve security problems versus just good enough in order to meet a regulatory or compliance certification. But what we're seeing now, especially over the past 2, 3, 4 years, the conversation of security has been so significant on the practitioner side, on the buyer side, that it's driving security to be the first conversation as a company goes into cloud providers and engages them, whether it's Salesforce, Workday, SuccessFactors, or Box. They're really having security be the first conversation. And that's very good. And what's really occurring behind the scenes in cloud providers is that we're starting to take a very different look at security, the ones that I believe will win in the market, on something to say, how do I be defensive versus how do I be proactive on the security conversation. So how do I solve the security problems of our customers versus what is the bare minimum in order to enter into the market? And that is a significant difference in how cloud providers are engaging the concept of security. And what that does downstream for certain cloud providers that take on that mantle, we really start looking at what are the problems and what are the solutions, as well as how do I drive it into my business? How do I drive and educate my marketing, my sales, and really look at our product to really drive a security solution, whether it's around data, around financial transactions, or otherwise. And that's a very proactive stance. And as we look at how it meets technically, that first and foremost comes out and to be more of a platform play. Instead of the web page SaaS application of old, we're seeing cloud providers saying, in order to inject myself into the security ecosystem of our customers, we really need to have an open RESTful API platform and a business development partnership to proactively, before our customers ask, to develop partnerships with the logging and analytics players, whether it's Sumo Logic, ArcSight, or otherwise. How do I have an identity and authentication partnership for Okta or Ping or Azure? How do I have a vulnerability management and MDM and other technologies that our customers are using? Because of old, our customers used to do the integrations themselves. As cloud providers in that client cloud model, the onus really falls on the cloud provider. And for them to do that integration, to really provide a secure platform for the customers, they need to have an open platform in order to build off of. And that's very, very important. And probably the last one, the third point I would talk about cloud providers, is really the ability to drive secure solutions that we're seeing in the market to really facilitate the problems that our customers are having. And so foremost, the ability to drive incident response today and resolve attacks and compromises within a typical company is very different than what we did 10 years ago. So if you're going to deal with an incident today, it's a very deeply technical, long drawn out process, which could take 3-6 months to identify every point of compromise of your network. Where did they come from? Who are the third parties that leverage and to be able to attack your environment, whether it's partners, possibly customers? How do you share that information with outside law enforcement, with your customers, with outside regulators, with your outside PR teams, as well as your internal ones, is really driving the need for more of a cloud-based incident response solution. And so we're seeing security practitioners drive to cloud to deal with the fundamental problems on how we deal with security today versus how we dealt with it 10, 15 years ago, when it was fairly much contained within the enterprise. When we saw compromises or incidents such as SLAM or virus, you would just yank out the network of the device that was infected and be able to go on about your day. Today, you need to do a concerted takedown, which requires many, many organizations, many third-party organizations, and it really requires solutions to help facilitate that. And we're starting to see that through cloud providers themselves. As we take a look at the security vendor landscape, we're starting to see a massive transition. And so as you look at the cloud providers that are taking advantage of the shift of content and transactions going to cloud providers, as the migration of employees on mobile devices leaving the office, you're seeing those controls migrate from the enterprise and actually bridge from internet to the enterprise themselves. So first and foremost, we're seeing an evolution, a rotation of the legacy incumbent providers, Symantec, McAfee, CA, and others, with upstarts that are really driving in innovative solutions that our enterprise customers need, such as SkyHigh, Netscope, Okta, Ping, Sumo Logic, and others, which are placing their controls within the cloud environments and injecting them into cloud providers like Salesforce, Box, and others, and being able to provide that bridging capability to provide that same control within their enterprise. And this is pretty significant because as we see that rotation, we are also seeing a change within the ecosystem of how companies, large companies, do innovation. And so large companies such as Symantec and others find it very, very challenging to do innovation because it's a matter of law of numbers. How are you able to start a business that can be relevant to a very large company is very, very difficult versus starting it as a startup and being able to drive 10, 15, $100 million. Those larger companies such as Symantec and others will acquire the smaller ones as they get big and then inject them into the market through their sales channels. What we're seeing is more of a resistance of those startups to actually be acquired, which only forces that rotation of incumbent security providers with the newer ones that are here. Some of them are actually here today. And so when we see that rotation, we're also seeing a rotation in expectations, a rotation of capabilities, and a deeper integration of what I would say is a new ecosystem of security vendors as we go forward. What we're also seeing in the security vendor landscape is really the change in the technologies. So in a couple of key areas, when we look at SIMs, or Security Event Incident Management Solutions, they've effectively had a horrible name in the past of how do we collect logs, analyze them, and actually produce actionable results for practitioners to go off and find out who's attacking them. What we're seeing is that those tools that were built upon regular expression and correlation rules are highly deprecated. But what we're seeing now is the algorithms, the machine learning, assisted machine learning algorithms that were developed in the 70s start to get applied to enterprise security. And one of the first and few areas that that's getting applied is in the SIM space. How do we do login analytics? And so it's driving a up-leveling of technologies that are very, very important for security practitioners to identify malicious activity and respond to them, such as Red Owl, Squirrel, Sumo Logic has some of the capabilities in them. They actually are developing better technologies to identify unknown attacks that we've never had before. And this also goes into where they're placed. And as you drive machine learning technologies into solutions, that makes it very difficult for an enterprise security practitioner to manage them because of the labor. It's a very special, if I can get that word out, it's a very specialized skill set to manage machine learning algorithms, those classifiers. And so placing them into a cloud-based model enables a back end of the service to not only provide a more advanced technology, to make it a lot more acceptable and frictionless for an end user of a practitioner to be able to leverage those capabilities. If that was not the case, we would have machine learning algorithms placed on the enterprise. One or two people would try to do it. It would be way over their heads, highly specialized on a skill set. That technology would be deprecated and actually be very horrific because we would have issues where things would be identified by technology but not by the individuals within the teams, and attacks would go unnoticed. We're also seeing those same machine learning algorithms applied to antivirus. So instead of signature-based models such as virus practitioners of the past, we're seeing upstarts such as Cylance, CloudStrike, Malwarebytes, developing machine learning algorithms to identify malicious code within an endpoint and driving the efficacy of identifying unknown malware from roughly 25–50% of the legacy malware providers to really more of the 95–98% efficacy, and actually driving a significant shift in how we combat the targeted attacks, the organized crime, as well as the state-sponsored attacks that we're seeing today. So it's actually amazing to see the benefits of some of the new technologies come out in enterprise, dealing with a problem that we've been suffering with for roughly 10 years or so. And probably lastly, the security practitioner. As content transactions leave, we're seeing the skill set of the security teams migrate from a deeply technical one to one of more process controls and risk management. Risk management is something that we've talked about a lot in industry, but not a lot of actual substance behind it. What we're starting to see is that it actually is developing as they're forced to drive and manage third parties properly. because they're actually storing very sensitive content and transactions. In addition to that, we're starting to see a maturation within the threat response capabilities. So as we deal with significant attacks at a much more sophisticated and technical nature, we're seeing that those security teams are being very, very specialized in how to weed out those malicious actors and do reverse engineering and actual technical analysis of the binaries that are attacking them and dealing with them in a much better way than we've ever done before. And probably lastly, vendor management. So vendor management as a whole has been not something that security practitioners have done very well. In addition, the procurement process, how companies are purchased and actually managed through an enterprise, is something that security practitioners are getting better as we move forward. Versus just seeing security as a technical one, they're actually seeing it more of how do I secure the processes of my company's procurement in addition to change management and the technical ones of the past. So we're seeing a more advancement of the skill sets of the security practitioners than we've ever been doing before. And so as we see the opportunities of cloud providers drawing more secure models within how they manage content and transactions, we're also seeing the evolution of the security vendors and the security practitioners, which ironically enough is a little bit of an echo of the past. As we move into client cloud models, it's looking very much like the mainframe era of the past, as content transaction leaves the endpoints, goes to server side, as endpoint security is pretty atrocious by a philosophy sense, and we're actually applying better security on a server side model and breaking the barriers of the enterprise that we've had in the past and able to push policies of your customers, of your enterprise, into wherever that content and transactions have going. So historically, we've only been able to secure that content as it's residing on our devices, and yet that content goes out to customers, outside regulators, auditors, partners, and the list goes on. Today, you're actually able to shove your policy to wherever that content goes, giving you a much greater and flexible security model than we've had in the client-server era. So we're seeing that echo of the past of the mainframe era and driving in a massive skill set change. And so this evolution that we see ourselves in is not one that I see as being a decrement of security, but we have an amazing opportunity ahead of us to actually drive security and solving some of the fundamental problems that we've been suffering with for roughly the past 20 years. And so with that, I say thank you, and I hope to talk to you later.